I'm not quite sure when I first learned that the world was not a safe place. But it was around the time that I learned to speak. There's no specific memory of danger, just an overall aura of fear, the apprehension of the other, the desire for security. Like most children, I sought security with my family, believing that my parents could keep me safe. And I learned one of the cruelest lessons that children learn at a young age, that their family, parents, caring adults cannot always guarantee their safety. For me, it was the cruelty of peers and the persistence of bullies who made the preschool, kindergarten, elementary school profoundly painful. As my classmates, likely responding to fears themselves, found security, like many adults do, through cliques, groupthink, the building of walls to keep in and out, and the use of violence, verbal or physical, to maintain those barriers. But even from this early age, I had a way with words. And I found that I could use my speech, my turns of phrases, my cutting insight of an elementary schooler, to confound, put down, persuade, and diffuse my would-be bullies, either by making myself a non-ideal target, I was the child of a teacher, or by leveraging my position against them, or exploiting a vulnerable weakness. It was a cruel form of protection, but it worked for a while. Until middle school arrived and words became the weapons of everyone my age, and my speech was no longer enough to keep me safe. And so I turned to my gifts for my protection because I could play the piano pretty well, and I was known for being rather smart. So when bullies my own age, or the adults in my church who began to perceive the early onsets of queerness and gender nonconformity as threats to the status quo came after my safety and threatened my security, I used my skills, my gifts, my uniqueness to convince them not to hurt me, to convince them that I belonged. For why would they want to hurt someone who could play the piano for the school choir or the church service, or who could entertain or help with homework, who was too much of an asset to risk getting rid of? And the strategy of earning my place, again, worked for a while, but it too faded as soon as the world caught up to me and my talents were revealed to be too common to really justify keeping me around. This became especially true when I entered the great equalizer of undergraduate life at college, where everyone was pretty darn smart and there were at least 10 people who could do what you do and maybe do it better. And so I turned to knowledge to save me, not just knowledge, but my confidence in study or my devotion to study, because I might not be able to persuade my way into safety nor earn my security through talents, but I could learn enough, study enough, succeed enough, know enough to see danger coming from far away and simply outthink it, outmaneuver it, devise a plan, form a strategy, and overcome any threat to my social, physical, emotional, relational, financial security with a combination of study and practice. Do you realize that I might have anxiety at this point? This worked while I was at college because it was exactly what the institution wanted. I found friendships that provided a sense of self, relationships that seemed to bring safety, studies that promised a successful future, but everything fell away as soon as college came to an end, and I discovered that real life was far too chaotic, unpredictable, unfair, and often cruel than a removed college campus in the middle of nowhere, Minnesota, can prepare you to know. And all the study in the world cannot prevent safety built on strategies, people-pleasing, and precarious performance from crumbling down like the house made of sand. And so, like many closeted queer people before me from cultures far and wide, I sought my security and safety next in the care that I could provide for children, specifically in the spiritual world. I invested all of my energy and passion into serving as a youth minister, believing that this integration of faith, talent, knowledge, all of the things that I had been working towards could bring me the security, the success, the end to fear that I so desperately desired. Once again, it worked for a time. And I believed that I had found what I was looking for in ministering to youth, but I was wrong. a changing political climate, churchgoers hostile to queerness in rural Minnesota, and church structures hostile to change, relied upon implied and realized threats of violence and silence to keep me in line, to remind me that I owed my life to the church and the church did not owe me safety in return. And after my leadership was threatened by my elders and apathy, I decided that I would seek my safety in ordained ministry. And while I studied at seminary, I met my spouse and found a relational and emotional security that I had never dreamt of. And then a global pandemic robbed me of any sense of safety, as each day was lived wondering whether it would bring the end of all that I held dear. But we survived, and I became a pastor, and I believe that surely now, with the authority bestowed by the church, my skills, gifts, talents, the confidence that came from coming out twice, and claiming the wholeness of myself, and all the privileges bestowed by being relatively wealthy for my age and in this time, now I would feel safe. Finally, I would feel secure. But I did not. Dear church, there are structures in our way of organizing that do the violence of limitation, minimizing and silence. There have been times, even here, even where I love this place, when I have felt so small and defenseless as to feel as terrified of everyone outside of myself as I did when I was 3 years old. And beyond that, our cultural climate is not set up for safety. It is terrifying to be queer in the world right now. And while it does get better to any young people living out there, I don't know how I'm supposed to feel safe when politicians and so-called influencers make a living out of rejecting my right to exist. And our culture considers their perspective valid. And those agents of anti-creation are present in our own community. Plenty of people in this city of Olympia reject my right to be a pastor and a person, and they grow in confidence every day, and all the wealth in the world cannot protect us from the culture of violence shaped by a chasm of wealth inequality that forces us into a battleground between billionaires and people wrongfully forced into poverty, that teaches us to hate our neighbors and suspect that every person who looks different from us by the color of the skin or the content of their clothing seeks to do us harm. And so by either our actions or our indifference, simply by living in this world of fear, I worry that we are forever condemned to crucify the many Jesuses who come before us seeking safety, shelter, security, because we are too busy feeling unsafe ourselves. I am delivering my life story of unsafety to you, not for the sake of pity, but to demonstrate that there is no happy ending. There is no way to find safety through any human practice, ability, skill, or acquisition. In our text today, we receive the horror story of Christianity, that we cannot we cannot save ourselves, nor can we keep ourselves safe. And any attempt to find safety and salvation through our own works and our own actions only leads us to become the very ones who crucified Jesus Christ. Jesus proclaims blessings for the poor, the hungry, the weeping, and the hated, and this is not a promise of some far-off heaven. It is because these are the people, the only people in the world, set up to receive the reign of God with sincerity because they do not have the corruption of wealth, privilege, and power that keeps them from placing the wholeness of their trust in the God who calls for love alone. Whereas Jesus curses those of us who are rich, who are full, who are laughing while the world burns, who are well regarded, because we are the people who are compelled to place their trust in the human powers of nations, charismatic leaders, ideologies, and our own successes and gifts. To us, those of us who are rich, powerful, privileged, God's love is a luxury, only affordable when it aligns with the things that we must and must not do to maintain the privileges and powers that give us the illusion of safety, when all they truly do is separate us from one another, separating us from the love of God. The horror of Christianity is that there is no safety promised in the love of God. It only offers the promise of transformation. A better way of living that comes from a community where all perceive and respond to the living God dwelling in all of their neighbors without exception. And few of us, rich or poor, are anywhere close to living with such a trust in the God who is love. Because we ought not fall in the trap of suggesting that suffering is a virtue that magically produces greater faith, just as offering we see in the world that suffering produces, or those who suffer go on to cause more suffering. Let us not romanticize the world and suggest that the poor, the hungry, and the oppressed automatically know how to live with love. That kind of thinking comes out of a charity mindset where the powerful preserve their privilege by pretending that it is all right for the poor to always be with us, rather than interrogating the biases, the terrorism that we do to ourselves that allows us to encounter our suffering neighbors and not do everything we can to serve and uplift them in the reign of God that dwells within them. Jesus' blessings and woes are not given so that we may preserve the binary between rich and poor with the idea that it is good to suffer, but so that the very concept of wealth inequality is abolished because it oppresses us all. And Jesus gives us these tools so that we may dismantle the false gods who tell us that we can have faith in the God who is love and allow our neighbor suffering from poverty, prejudice, or houselessness to continue suffering rather than sharing everything we can with them. We are giving these blessings and woes to abolish and reform the systems that allow for children to remain hungry, afraid, and unsafe. We are called to ask in this moment whether this is a society that is compatible with the God who is love, and answer with the courage that comes from the vulnerability of fear, no. Because Jesus asks us to have the courage to be afraid, to be very afraid. To run away from fear in this world of ever-growing divides of power and privilege is to seek our security and safety through human powers, rather than opening ourselves up to the vulnerability that is trusting in the God who is love. And faith in the God who is love requires acknowledging that we all have just as much to fear as those who are poor, hungry, and oppressed, because a society built upon the sin of separation oppresses us all. And the bad news is that all of us will fail, as we have already repeatedly failed to give our whole faith to the God who is love, to dismantle our world of binaries and bring all people together, abolishing the wealth, power, and privileges that divide us. We will fail to cease finding our safety and security in human powers. Most of us will go home to sleep behind walls tonight, where there are thousands and hundreds of thousands who won't. However false and futile these human powers may be, we will still go to them. We will reject the God who comes to us in the body of the stranger, the other, the one we are taught to fear, and seek our safety in false gods. But the good news of the Christ who embodied love into death and resurrection, the salvation that ushers into the reign of God, is that you will be given endless opportunities to give your faith to the God who is love. For every time you are confronted with the chance to love your neighbor across the divisions of power, privilege, and wealth, that is God coming to you, knowing that you are afraid and knowing that you probably feel unsafe, insecure, anxious, as we all in this world today feel terribly, terribly anxious. That is God coming to you, and from that fear asking you to be brave, inviting you into the transformation of the world into the image of God's love, where safety, security, and freedom is possible. It is not a human world, but it comes in through the human bodies who are God, showing up again and again with forgiveness and grace, asking you for your faith in a world transformed by relying solely on the love of the God who is love. My God, I have forsaken you my whole life. I have sought safety in myself, my power, my privilege, my wealth. I want to believe. Help my unbelief, and let me trust in your love when I am next afraid, when you come before me in the way that I cannot accept. Help me not hide behind all my little words that promise to keep me safe, and help me to trust in your love that is greater through fear.